Hello. Today I'm going to talk about what I was like as a child. I'm a man, but the image in this video is an image of my girlfriend. I was very shy when I was young. I was embarrassed to speak in front of many people. When I was around 6 years old, I was at someone's wedding, and I think the host asked me a question. I answered the question in a really funny and confident way, but when I saw the audience watching me and laughing at what I had said, I became embarrassed and hid under a table. I was also extremely embarrassed about giving presentations in elementary school. From around the age of 7, whenever I had to stand in front of people and give a presentation, my face would turn completely red. Even now, my face turns red very easily. Sometimes I think, what if someone thinks I like somebody? And then my face turns red. Then I think, they might see my red face and think he really does like someone, and he's embarrassed about it. When I think that, my face becomes even redder, even though I don't actually like that person. Anyway, I was very sensitive to other people's attention. I was extremely sensitive to embarrassment, and I still am. I was so conscious of how other people saw me that even when I entered my classroom, I paid attention to the way I walked because I didn't want to look stupid. There were times when students had to take turns reading the textbook aloud. Even then, I was always thinking about what kind of voice I should use so that I wouldn't sound stupid. Like everyone else, I was very curious as a child, and I'm still extremely curious now. When I was 4 years old, I suddenly became afraid of death. So I asked my mother this question: when do people die? My mother told me that people live until they are 100 years old. I thought that was still very far away, so my fear disappeared. Looking back, I think my mother could see the future. At the time, the average life expectancy in South Korea was around 75 years, but she said 100. She must have been able to see the future. I was also a child with poor coordination. In kindergarten, we played a game where we had to bounce a ball while moving toward the finish line. The other children could easily bounce the ball and reach the finish line. I thought it would be easy too, but when I bounced the ball on the ground, it flew off in a completely different direction, so I couldn't do it properly. I had no idea how the other children were doing it. I think that was when I started to believe that I was a little lacking in some ways. Like many families with young children, we had a world map in our house. I looked at it and realized how large the world was. But we didn't only have a world map, there was also an illustration that explained space. It showed Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and their moons. On the far left side, there was an image of the Sun. Unlike the other planets, however, the Sun was not shown as a complete circle. After thinking about it, I realized something. The reason the Sun didn't look round was that it was actually enormous. That's right, the illustration showed only a part of the sun. It was an illustration that expressed its enormous size extremely well. It also explained that the countless stars in space were the same type of object as our sun. It said that the closest star to the sun was 4.3 light years away. It explained the concept of a light year, and it also said that light was the fastest thing in the universe. It said that light could travel around the Earth 7.5 times in 1 second, and that it took light about 1.3 seconds to travel from the Earth to the moon. It also showed how long light would take to travel from the sun to each planet. I remember that the Earth was about 8 light minutes away from the sun, while Uranus or Pluto took several hours. Anyway, I think that illustration helped me become interested in physics later in my life. I don't know who created that illustration. I also don't know why my parents, who knew almost nothing about physics or space, happened to buy it and put it on the wall of my room. But that illustration changed my life. This means that the things I considered to be part of my identity may have been created by extremely unlikely coincidences. I have always been extremely curious about space, and I feel a tremendous sense of awe when I understand the universe. But that part of me might have been created entirely by chance. On the other hand, another person might have seen the same space illustration and felt no interest in it at all. Even without that illustration, I might still have become curious about space later in life. When we think carefully about this, we usually imagine that there is something permanent and unique called the self. But do I have these characteristics because this is simply the kind of person I truly am? Had the chemical processes in my mother's womb been slightly different, the person called me might have developed a completely different identity. Anyway, I'll talk about that subject more properly another time. Let's return to the story. Because of this, I liked books about space. There was one book that explained Einstein's theory of relativity. It was written for middle school students, but it wasn't just a shallow overview. It included equations and explained the subject in some depth. But it was also explained in a very entertaining way. The book explained that the ordinary rule for adding velocities is not perfectly accurate. For example, imagine that a train is moving at 100 kilometers per hour and I throw a ball forward at 50 kilometers per hour from inside the train. According to classical calculations, the speed of the ball and the speed of the train would be added together, so the ball would travel at 150 kilometers per hour. However, according to relativity, it would not be exactly 150 kilometers per hour. It would be slightly slower than that. The difference would be extremely small. I haven't calculated the exact number, but there would be a very tiny difference like that. In everyday life, however, this difference is not very important. The difference is simply too small. The errors caused by air resistance and other variables would be much larger. So why is this still important? It is important because the difference increases dramatically as an object's speed increases. The clocks on satellites moving rapidly around the Earth also require adjustments to correct differences in time. In other words, Einstein discovered that something we thought was completely obvious was not perfectly accurate. Explaining exactly why this difference occurs would take too long to include here, but I can give you a hint. The speed of light is constant in the universe, and objects with mass cannot travel faster than light. Imagine that we turn on a flashlight while running. According to common sense, we might think that the speed of the light coming from the flashlight should be the ordinary speed of light plus our running speed. But that is not what actually happens. Whether the flashlight is turned on by someone who is running, riding on a train, flying through space in a spaceship, or sitting completely still, the speed of light measured in a vacuum is the same. This is not an intuitive idea, but this is how our universe actually works. Einstein discovered this. Anyway, when I learned and understood things like this in middle school, the world seemed incredibly mysterious to me. At that time, I was also a student who enjoyed making games. When I was young, computer games were beginning to become very popular. The generations older than mine might have mostly played games in arcades. But starting with my generation, personal computers became widely available, so we could easily experience many PC games. My parents bought me a computer when I was in the third grade of elementary school. I was so happy that I felt like jumping into the air. Even now, I'm truly grateful that my parents did that for me. Now that I think about it, I had forgotten that gratitude until today. Anyway, I would like to use this video to thank my parents. Thank you, Mom and Dad. But my parents don't speak English, so there is no chance that they will ever watch this. Haha. Anyway, I experienced many different PC games. When I went to school, I made games in notebooks that imitated PC games. We called them notebook games. When I was a child, boys around my age throughout South Korea probably played these games. I don't know whether children in other countries did the same thing. Anyway, I created many games in notebooks that imitated PC games. Most of them were RPGs. During lunch breaks or between classes, my friends would gather around my desk and play my games. Another friend created gambling games. I got an idea from that and introduced dice into my RPG. The stationery store near our school sold dice, so I bought one and added elements of probability to my game. At the time, there was also a tool that allowed people to make RPGs easily. It was a program called RPG Maker 2000. You could use it to create RPGs relatively easily. I made a few games with it for fun, but I never made a game that many people could enjoy. I did show some of them to one or two of my friends. You could also add any background music you wanted. During boss battles, I made the game play an audio clip of someone continuously shouting swear words. There was also a game called StarCraft at the time. StarCraft contained many different kinds of content, including a feature that allowed players to create their own maps. In Korea, we called these custom maps use maps. People who know will know. Players could create all kinds of games using these maps. They created games and played many different kinds of content together over the internet. The funny thing is that people even created pornographic maps. They were not sexy at all, but the fact that someone put an enormous amount of effort into making something like that was extremely funny to me. StarCraft custom maps made me spend several years of my life playing games. At the time, many Korean parents told their children to stop playing games and study instead. But sometimes I wonder whether I could have avoided taking such a long and indirect path through life if I had continued developing my hobby of making games. Maybe I could have become successful as a game developer much earlier. This is a slightly different story, but I also want to talk about how I learned Python. When I was in the military, about 1 or 2 months before I completed my service, I became obsessed with bulls and cows. In Korea, we call it number baseball, but in English, it is called bulls and cows. Anyway, smartphones were forbidden in the military at the time, and there was nothing to do. We were extremely bored, so I frequently played bulls and cows with the soldiers under my command. After playing bulls and cows so many times, I realized that I had developed something like a manual or an algorithm for solving it. I analyzed that algorithm. My method was so simple that I thought I might be able to explain it to a computer. Suddenly, I became extremely motivated. I thought, oh, maybe I can create an artificial intelligence that solves bulls and cows. At the time, it had been about 2 years since AlphaGo had defeated one of the world's best Go players. ChatGPT did not exist yet, but people who knew about artificial intelligence already had enormous expectations for it. At that time, I knew absolutely nothing about programming, but I thought that I could learn programming and make a computer play bulls and cows using my algorithm as well as I could. After leaving the military, I learned all the basic Python concepts I needed to create it in 3 days. Basic Python is really not that difficult. 1 week later, I was able to create the bulls and cows program I had imagined, but the computer was more powerful than I had expected. Without thinking at all, the computer could compare all those possible answers in 0.1 seconds and eliminate every impossible answer. So strictly speaking, the program did not use my original algorithm exactly. Anyway, I created a program that could solve bulls and cows, and I continued developing methods that allowed it to guess the answer in fewer attempts. I ran the code many times and tested how many guesses it required on average. I researched which algorithm could solve bulls and cows most efficiently. I was having an incredible amount of fun researching this when I began thinking about many other things. At that time, I wanted to make money by doing this kind of work. I thought that I would need to earn a PhD in computer science and work as a researcher somewhere, so I abandoned the project and returned to reality. Now, all of that code is gone. Today, I talked about a journey that even I had almost forgotten. I once planned to attend graduate school for computer science, and I continued thinking about my future. Eventually, I decided that artificial intelligence would become the most powerful force in the future, and I made it my goal to become a researcher at an AI company. But to do that, I thought I would need to work for an American company, which meant I would also need to study English. Well, yes. Realistically, my abilities were not good enough. Even now, I can't speak English very well, and I'm still here in Korea doing this. Then I met my girlfriend. I learned about the importance of relationships, and 4 years passed like that. I was quite an ambitious young man. Now I study Buddhism and try to live without excessive desire. After realizing that all of it was desire, I became more comfortable. Still, artificial intelligence makes life interesting these days. Scenes that once appeared only in science fiction movies have become reality. Like Jarvis from Iron Man, we can now have conversations with AI. When we ask AI to do something, it can perform the task like an assistant. What exactly did I find so interesting about that bulls and cows algorithm? Leave your guesses in the comments. Thank you for watching this long video.